Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather, May 23rd, 2022. I'm David Percy. Up first, we've got on the river breakup, we got a blank river breakup map today, so not much to talk about there. So from that, we'll go on to the fire danger map. Areas of high to very high fire danger, Yukon Flats, and then Porcupine River there on down along the Yukon River and to the south, and then sort of up into the southern Koyukuk and southern Kobuk Valley there. Kind of an extensive area of higher fire danger. And also over the Yukon Delta, away from the coastline, high fire danger that kind of extends down now some areas of high fire danger into the Kuskokwim Delta. And also northeast Bristol Bay there up to Iliamna Lake, southern Kuskokwim Valley kind of high. And still an area of high fire danger for the high to very high actually, but a little bit less than what it was yesterday with the cooler temperatures for the northern Cook Inlet area on up into the Manauskas-Susitna Valley zones, and some high fire danger in and around the Fairbanks area, and that's about it. So moving on to the hazardous weather graphic, flood advisory out, let's see, through Wednesday up there for the Salsha River. Up in the Fairbanks zone there, Salsa River, that's out through Wednesday for snowmelt flooding. And then there's a flood advisory out for the Chena through Tuesday, again for the same thing, melting snow, keeping river levels high, resulting in minor flooding along both rivers there. And then the flood advisory continues out through Wednesday, or at least through midday Wednesday for the northern Copper River Basin, which includes the Gulkana River and Lake Louise Road. Then again, that's out until midday Wednesday. And for satellite imagery, pretty sunny skies, south central Alaska. Starting to see some clouds, moisture build over the Kenai Peninsula and the Copper River Basin in the eastern interior areas down to the North Gulf Coast, carrying rain at Valdez this afternoon at about 2 p.m. this afternoon, some rain in Valdez, and also moisture showers up across the Copper River Basin, eastern Alaska Range. Northway picked up about 0.3 of an inch in the last 12 hours, and also over the Panhandle, clouds and showers there. Rainfall amounts range from 1/10 of an inch at Juneau to about 0.3 of an inch at Ketchikan. And you can see the clouds there extending from just north of the upper Yukon River there down across the eastern interior areas with showers falling from some of the clouds there, and also another band of moisture from the Arctic coast southward in toward Norton Sound and the Yukon Delta, but nothing but high pressure out over the Bering Sea. And you can see kind of the clockwise circulation with that high center over the western Bering Sea there, and lots of sunshine, Bristol Bay up into Cook Inlet and into the central interior again, but the only temperature reaching 70 at mid-afternoon, or at least by 2 p.m., was sleet mute with 70 degrees even. Cooler temperatures along Cook Inlet. Kenai was right around 50 degrees at the same time, at kind of a deepening marine layer occurring over Cook Inlet. Otherwise, showers of rain along the eastern North Gulf Coast, as I mentioned, down across the southeast coast, and developing showers over the Kenai Peninsula. Building clouds could result in some scattered shower activity here this evening, later this afternoon, this evening, but definitely over the eastern Alaska Range and upper Tanana Valley locations, with showers possible all the way up to Eagle. Otherwise, light winds and clear skies, mostly clear skies over the northern part of the state to the Arctic coast, and areas of low clouds and fog extending over areas of the Bering Sea, but winds quite light, and let's see, precipitation is about non-existent out there as well. And for the forecast for tonight, not much change. Showers possibly getting into the Chugach Mountains, Talkeetnas, Turnagain Arm, Knik Arm, those areas, and mostly over the central eastern Kenai Peninsula. A pretty good chance of showers over Prince William Sound, the Copper River Basin, the North Gulf Coast, Yakutat into the northern Panhandle, kind of scattering out over the southern southeast coast. But from the Alaska Range northward, or at least, I'll call it Alaska Range northward, variably cloudy skies, light winds, and low clouds and fog along the Arctic coast. High pressure continues over the Bering Sea for light winds there with some low clouds and fog. And a very weak system south of the western Aleutians may result in some light precipitation in among the lower clouds and fog in that area. And for tomorrow, nothing really out west at all, just high pressure hanging over the Bering Sea, light winds, precipitation free, maybe a few showers trying to come onshore on the north shore of Unalaska Island, scattered showers Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. And from the lower Yukon River Valley, maybe the Kuskokwim Valley could see a shower or two. It looks like a little more in the way of clouds tomorrow for Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula into the Manauskas-Susitna Valley with a better chance of showers. Most of the shower activity confined to the mountainous terrain, but it'll be the most widespread over the Copper River Basin to the eastern Alaska Range again, on down into the eastern North Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle. And for the outlook on Wednesday, maybe a flurry or two along the western Arctic coast, otherwise variably cloudy up that way with some possible sunshine over toward Prudhoe Bay to Barter Island, Kaktovik. Definitely mostly sunny from the eastern Brooks Range southward into the Kobuk, Koyukuk Valleys, Seward Peninsula, and the Yukon Delta there. But look for clouds and showers, Kuskokwim Valley from the Kuskokwim Mountains eastward to the Alaska Range, and then northeastward there to Nenana, Denali Park, and into the upper Tanana Valley. Maybe an isolated thunderstorm or two for the eastern Alaska Range. That extends on into the Yukon. As far as the southeast coast goes, look for partly to mostly sunny skies and a dry day with light winds there. Another partly to mostly sunny day for the Kenai Peninsula, and from the southern Susitna Valley southward, Prince William Sound looking pretty good. Kodiak Island, same thing, some sun breaks as well. And some scattered showers developing over the Talkeetna Mountains and possibly the Alaska Peninsula. And high pressure holding over the Bering Sea, now drifting once again back to the to the east a little bit near the Pribilof. So light winds, dry conditions, but the storm system trying to push up toward the western Aleutians won't quite make it, at least through Wednesday afternoon. Lows tonight in the 20s for the Arctic coast and North Slope into the Brooks Range. Otherwise, south of the mountains there in the 30s. All the way down to the Tanana Valley there in the Alaska Range. At 30 degree, I believe, is McKinley Park. Forecast low of 30 tonight. Mid-30s Copper River Basin. 24 forecast low for Eagle. Otherwise, much milder and in the mid to upper 40s over the southwest interior, then cooling back into the 30s out toward the Bering Strait coast. And highs tomorrow in the 60s central interior, 30s Arctic coast, and 50s east of the Alaska Range, Bristol Bay. 40s for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, upper 40s to mid-50s for the Panhandle. Lows Wednesday morning, upper 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast, mid to upper 30s Copper River Basin, upper 30s to mid-40s south central Alaska, and mid to 35 to 40 for the Tanana Valley, and then 40 to 45 out over the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim River Valley locations, back into the 30s toward the coast, 20s for the Arctic coast. Highs a little warmer, 68 to 72 over the central interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic for Tuesday morning. IFR up over the north slope in the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR down across the Noatak Valley, western Brooks Range to Shishmaref and the Bering Strait. VFR, southern Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, all of the northern Bering Sea, right down to St. Paul Island. South of the Pribilofs, marginal VFR from Kiska Island eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Prince William Sound into Yakutat, and then along the coast of the Panhandle. Inside waters, all VFR to start the day out. IFR, Shimmy and Attu. And for the afternoon, IFR pulls off the Arctic coast, so we got good VFR through all of interior Alaska, right down, except for the eastern North Gulf Coast, maybe Cordova, Cape St. Elias, and marginal VFR, and marginal conditions hugging the coastline from Yakutat on down toward Prince of Wales Island. Narrow band of IFR right across the Pribilofs, and VFR, Atka, Adak, marginal VFR from Chitka to Shimmy and Attu. VFR, St. Lawrence Island, up across the Seward Peninsula. And then for the morning Wednesday, some IFR clipping the western Arctic coast there, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne to maybe Point Ley. VFR eastward there. All of interior Alaska starting out VFR, exception being near Kachemak Bay. Resurrection Bay looks marginal. And southern Kenai Peninsula, Alaska Peninsula marginal, and Chimianatu marginal. Otherwise, everywhere else looking pretty good. VFR flying. Then on Wednesday afternoon, a band of IFR pushes into the northern Bering Sea and extends northeastward across the Seward Peninsula into the northwest coast, Kotzebue, right across Noatak, on up across the western Brooks Range to the west central Arctic coast. Stays VFR over interior Alaska and the Panhandle with the marginal VFR pulled off the coastline now. Kodiak VFR all the way out to Amchitka Island. And for passes, Anatuvik VFR, Adigan VFR, the Alaska Range looking good, be completely VFR. In fact, Lake Clark Merrill, ceilings visibility is unlimited. Kavu also for rainy and windy. Isabel VFR, both entrances, and Mentasta, good VFR, south and north entrance. Tanita, a VFR day coming up, and Portage VFR even on the eastern approach. And for Chilkoot and White, looking good, VFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet over the eastern interior, 2 to 3,000 feet with a 2,000-foot pocket there. Eastern Copper River Basin down into the northern Panhandle, and then 4 to 6,000 feet over the western central part of the state, with 8,000 feet out there over the west central Bering Sea extending down toward the western Aleutians. Otherwise, from Atka Island to Unmak Island, about 4,000 feet. Icing, let's see, areas of light mixed between 5 to 12,000 feet from the Chugach Mountains, possibly, or Talkeetnas, more likely. Prince William Sound, across the central southern Copper River Basin, the Coast Range, eastern North Gulf Coast, into the northern half of the Panhandle. Otherwise, the remainder of the state, nothing of significance at all, icing-wise. And the jet stream, upper low there off the eastern Arctic coast, so we've got northwest winds, about 55 knots, not really strong for this elevation. You can see the stronger jet south of the Panhandle there, south of the Queen Charlotte's, cutting right across Vancouver Island at about 120 knots. Otherwise, north to northeast, 50 to 60 knots. Nunivak Island down to the east central Aleutians. And at 9,000 feet, 20 knot westerlies, eastern Arctic coast, northwest 20 on the western Arctic coast near Point Ley, east 20, Togiak Bay, and 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, Unalaska Island, as well as Chimianatu. Light variable winds elsewhere. Light variable winds for the Panhandle, Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak Island at 3,000 feet, except for the eastern Arctic coast, little area there, Dead Horse over toward Kaktovik, west 25 knots. Northeast 20 knots just west of Nunivak Island, eastern Aleutians northeast at 20, and then some 25 knot winds there associated with that low southwest of Chimianatu. Otherwise, going on to turbulence, looking pretty good over really a very smooth turbulence day coming up over the state, maybe the eastern Arctic coast, isolated moderate chop, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, same thing, Nunivak Island, Fox Islands, and maybe a little more extensive, but just isolated moderate from Amchitka Island to Shimia. And after the break, I'll be back with the rain forecasts.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRAS. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRAS. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's sea ice analysis up along the western Arctic coast. That area of thinner ice continues to slowly expand, but still pretty heavy ice there from Point Hope down in along the northwest coast into Kotzebue Sound on the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Then a little bit thinner there in the Bering Strait area, and heavier ice again north of the St. Lawrence Island area. And moving on to the more southern look of the sea ice conditions here. See Norton Sound, quite an area of open water there. Otherwise, again, holding but slowly melting there around St. Lawrence Island, and slower melting going on there over the northwest Bering Sea. And for the coastal water forecast, light variable winds for the inside channels and waters tomorrow from Lynn Canal down to Dixon Entrance. Variable 5 knots, seas slight. Outer coastline, same forecast. Variable winds 5 knots, seas at about 5 feet. And then the outlook for Wednesday, light variable winds over the inside waters at about 5 knots, give or take, and seas pretty slight, but up to 4 feet maybe for Clarence Strait. Out along the coast, on the south coast, northwest at 15 knots, 6-foot seas. North coast, northwest breeze at 10 knots with seas running 4 to 5 feet. Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, variable winds at 10 knots. For the North Gulf Coast, seas will be around 5 feet. Variable winds also for the Barren Islands with seas at 5 feet. Kamishak Bay, variable winds 10 knots, seas 3 feet. And Cook Inlet, south to southwest breeze in the afternoon at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. On Wednesday, Cook Inlet, southwest breeze 10 knots, seas 3 feet. Light variable winds for Kamishak Bay with 3-foot seas. And for the Barren Islands and the western North Gulf Coast, westerly winds at 15 knots. Eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest at 15, and Prince William Sound, west winds at 10 knots. Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 knots, seas 2 to 6 feet. Alaska Peninsula, variable winds at 10 knots, seas 2 to 5 feet. Bristol Bay, we'll give it southeast at 10 instead of variable, with seas very slight there at 1 foot. And moving on to Wednesday, Kodiak Island, variable to west winds 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. And for the Alaska Peninsula, variable to north winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 2 to 4 feet, and west winds at 10 knots for Bristol Bay with 2-foot seas. On Alaska Island, tomorrow, Tuesday, north winds 15 to 20 knots, and for Unmak Island, north winds 15 to 20 knots. Adak and Atka, winds will be variable at 10 knots with 4-foot seas. East-southeast winds at 15 knots for the western Aleutians. And for the western Aleutians on Wednesday, from Shimia to Amchitka Island, northeast winds 20 knots, seas 6 feet. Adak and Atka, northeast 15 to 20 knot winds. And for the Fox Islands, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, seas running 2 to 5 feet. For the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, northeast winds 15 knots. Yukon Delta coast, northwest winds at 20 knots. Northwest 20 also for St. Matthew Island. North winds 15 knots for the Pribilofs. West winds at 10 knots for St. Lawrence Island. And variable winds at 10 knots for Norton Sound. And for Wednesday, Norton Sound, southwest winds 15 knots, west 15 for St. Lawrence Island, variable winds at 10 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, southwest at 10 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Pribilofs, light variable winds at 10 knots for Wednesday, seas down to 3 feet, and St. Matthew Island, winds will be west at 15 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, west winds 15 to 20 knots, otherwise the central and western coast, west winds at 10 knots. Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, south winds at 15. Cape Thompson to Wales, winds will be south at 10 knots. And then for the day Wednesday, from Cape Thompson all the way up to Point Lane, winds will be westerly at 15 knots. Central Arctic coast, south at 15. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds will be southeast, 10 to 15 knots. For tonight, low clouds and fog up along the Arctic coast. There may be a flurry or two, but nothing significant, just maybe reducing visibility to ceilings at times. Otherwise, fair over the interior. Mountain showers, especially over the Copper River Basin, kind of drifting into the Talkeetnas and Chugach Mountains this evening. Chance up for Turnagain Arm and possibly the Kenai Peninsula, but not too great a chance. Better chance of showers over the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for the day Tuesday, again, mostly sunny in the interior, mountain showers developing over southern Alaska, kind of showery for the Panhandle, and then the day Wednesday, a little cooler up into the mid-Tanana Valley areas with a better chance of showers, but dry from the Kenai Peninsula to the southeast coast. Thank you for joining.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.